25 engineers crowded around the giant crashing system, their voices shaking, their fingers trembling over keyboards they no longer trusted. Red warnings flashed like alarm bells, and every second felt like another piece of the company falling apart. But somehow, even in all that chaos, the director still found time to laugh at the delivery driver's son. Sherry Brooks held the lunch bags tight against her chest, trying not to look scared. Her boy walked beside her, quiet like always, his eyes darting toward the flashing screens instead of the people. When the engineers shouted, he flinched a little. When the director barked orders, he stared at the floor. Then the director snapped. "If you're so smart, fix it now." His voice blasted through the room, shaking every engineer's confidence even more. No one answered him. No one even breathed. Jalen's eyes landed on one line of code repeating again and again. A soft whisper slipped from him before he could stop it. "That's a routing loop. It'll never restart unless you clear the buffer." One engineer turned. What did he say? Sherry froze. Jalen froze harder. Another engineer leaned closer. "Kid, say that again." Before Jalen could speak, the director spun around so fast it made Sherry take a step back. His face twisted with annoyance. "Kid, this is real engineering. Stay in your lane." A few engineers chuckled under their breath. One shook his head like Jalen had said something embarrassing. Sherry felt her stomach drop. Jalen's shoulders tightened. His hands curling into fists he kept hidden behind the lunch bags. For a moment, the whole room stared at them like they didn't belong there at all. Then one engineer quietly tried the fix. A green light blinked, the system began to heal. And the director's cold eyes locked on Jalen as the humiliation hit the room like a punch. Jalen Brooks had always been the quiet one in every room. Quiet at school, quiet at home, quiet in the world. It wasn't shyness. It was the simple truth that no one ever listened long enough to hear him. Adults talked over him. Kids ignored him. Teachers brushed off his questions because they sounded too complicated. He learned early that some people only heard what they expected to hear, and no one expected brilliance from a delivery driver's son. Most weekends, while other kids played games or hung out at the mall, Jalen rode beside his mom in her old silver sedan. The seats squeaked, the heater only worked on one side, and the radio sometimes shut off whenever they hit a bump. But Sherry made it work, 2 delivery jobs. Long hours, tired eyes hidden behind a hopeful smile. "Baby, one day your mind's gonna take us out of here," she always said. He wished he believed her, but every time someone looked past him like he was invisible, that belief slipped further away. Their apartment was small, but the kitchen table was always covered with something Jalen had taken apart. Pieces of old phones, broken laptops neighbors threw away, a bag of mismatched cables he dug out of a recycling bin because they still had potential. He fixed things the way most kids played video games, focused, obsessed, losing track of time. No one had ever taught him. His brain just loved patterns, and broken machines were giant puzzles begging to be solved. But machines were easier than people. People judged, people assumed, people mocked. And in his 16 years, no one mocked sharper than professionals who thought degrees made them better than everyone else. That was why Sherry tried to shield him from moments like the one in Horizon Dynamics. She wanted him to see the world, not feel crushed by it. But life didn't care about timing, and humiliation had a way of landing right in front of you when you least expected it. Sherry worked so much she barely slept. There were days she nodded off in the car between deliveries, days she apologized to Jalen for being tired, even when it wasn't her fault. Her dream wasn't big. She just wanted enough money to breathe, to stop checking the price of every grocery item, to pay rent without holding her breath. Jalen's dream was different. He wanted to matter. He wanted the world to hear him once and take him seriously. Just once. But every time he opened his mouth in front of people with badges, titles, and expensive clothes, they smirked like he was telling a joke he didn't understand. He remembered one day at school when he showed a math teacher a shortcut he invented. A clean, beautiful piece of logic that solved the problem faster. The teacher didn't even look at it. Stick to the method on the board. The class laughed. The teacher moved on. And Jalen felt that familiar sting in his chest, a mix of embarrassment and loneliness. Now at Horizon Dynamics, that feeling returned the second those engineers laughed. They didn't see a prodigy, they saw a kid with a delivery bag. Dr. Raymond Coyle, The man running the place was everything Jalen feared in adults with power. Confident, loud, sharp-tongued. The kind of person who needed to be the smartest one in every room, even if it meant tearing someone else down. He had built a whole career on his reputation. People feared him. People obeyed him. And the idea of a 16-year-old solving his problem was something his ego couldn't handle. What no one knew was that Coyle had been slipping for years. New technology moved too fast for him. His skills grew rusty. His mistakes grew bigger. But instead of admitting it, he hid behind sarcasm and scare tactics. Whenever a younger engineer suggested something new, he cut them off with a joke that wasn't funny. Whenever someone outshined him, he twisted the story until he looked like the hero. He ruled the floor through intimidation, not talent. He told himself that he deserved respect, that he earned his position. But deep down, a quiet fear sat in his chest, a fear that someone younger, sharper, and hungrier would one day expose the cracks in his expertise. And that fear exploded the moment Jalen spoke, the moment a teenager saw what 25 trained engineers missed, the moment a boy from a lower-income neighborhood with a second-hand laptop and no degree solved a crisis Coyle couldn't. It wasn't just humiliation. It was his worst nightmare coming to life. For Jalen, the humiliation cut differently. It wasn't just the laughter. It wasn't even Coyle's voice booming across the room, telling him to stay in his lane. It was the look on Sherry's face, the way she swallowed her reaction, the way she held her breath, trying not to show hurt. Jalen had seen that look before, at gas stations where people talked down to her, at restaurants where customers snapped their fingers at her, at delivery drop-offs where people barely made eye contact. He hated that look more than anything in the world. It reminded him that the world judged his mother the same way it judged him, by what they did, not who they were. As they walked back to the car after the incident, Sherry tried to act normal. "It's fine, baby, don't worry about them." But Jalen heard the crack in her voice. He stared out the window while she drove, his mind replaying that moment again and again. The laughter, the dismissive tone, the cold stare. It burned like fire inside him, turning humiliation into something sharper. He didn't want revenge. He wanted recognition. He wanted truth. He wanted people like Coyle to choke on the lie they kept telling the world, that only certain people could be genius. That night, while Sherry washed dishes in silence, Jalen sat at the table surrounded by wires, chips, and old tech pieces. His mind raced with possibilities, ideas, patterns. Something inside him refused to let the day end quietly. He looked up once at his mother. She smiled tiredly without turning around. He whispered so softly she couldn't hear, "One day they're going to see." And in the quiet of their small kitchen, a new fire began to grow. A fire Coyle would soon regret ever lighting. The silence after the fix was heavier than the noise before. The green lights blinked on the main screen, and every engineer froze like they had seen a ghost. One of them leaned forward, tapped a few keys, and whispered under his breath, It's actually stabilizing." Another engineer stared at the screen. How? How did that even? Someone turned toward the door where Jalen and Sherry stood. "Wait, didn't the kid say something about the buffer?" The room's attention shifted like a wave. First confusion, then surprise, then something darker. Coyle stepped forward slowly, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. No. There is absolutely no way a random kid fixed what 25 engineers could not. He pointed at the screen like it was lying to him. "Someone here made a lucky guess, that's all," one engineer whispered, "but..." He said the exact fix. Coyle whipped around. "What did you just say?" The engineer swallowed hard and sank back into his chair. The others kept their heads down, afraid to breathe. Jalen stood still, not proud, not even hopeful, just quiet, waiting for someone to say thank you, or maybe sorry, or maybe anything that didn't feel like a slap. But Coyle stepped closer until he was only a foot away from Jalen. "You embarrassed my team." Sherry reached for her son's arm, pulling him back slightly. She didn't trust the man's tone. "We're just here to deliver lunch, sir. We're leaving now," Coyle sneered. "Good. And don't come back." The words dropped like stones. A few engineers exchanged glances, uncomfortable ones, but nobody spoke. Nobody defended the kid. Nobody said he helped. Jalen lowered his eyes as the humiliation crawled up his spine. Sherry whispered, "Let's go, baby." They walked out, the door closing behind them. But the sting stayed in Jalen's chest. He didn't want to look at his mom because he already knew what he'd see in her eyes, pain trying to hide behind strength. Back in the car, Sherry tried to breathe normally. People like that, they don't know better, don't let it get to you. Jalen's voice was barely there. I wasn't trying to show off, I know. They laughed at me. I know. He turned toward the window. His reflection stared back at him, a mix of anger and shame twisting inside. I didn't even do anything wrong. Sherry put a shaky hand on his shoulder. Sometimes the world punishes the right people. He didn't answer. He clenched his jaw instead. He watched horizon dynamics get smaller in the rearview mirror as his mum drove away, and something inside him hardened. By the time they got home, Sherry's delivery app notifications were waiting on her phone. 3 messages, all the same cold line. Your account has been suspended pending investigation for unprofessional behavior. Sherry read the words 6 times before she spoke. This has to be a mistake. Jalen stepped closer. What does it mean? It means we can't work, she whispered. A hollow ache spread through his chest. But we didn't do anything. Sherry sat at the kitchen table, her hands shaking as she tried to appeal the suspension, but the screen kept flashing the same message. Decision final. Jalen saw her shoulders drop, saw her eyes fill, saw the exhaustion hit her like a weight she couldn't lift anymore. He whispered, "This is because of him." Sherry didn't deny it. She just pressed her palm against her forehead and closed her eyes. The apartment felt small, silent, crushed. Jalen looked around their kitchen, the peeling counter, the flickering light, the stack of unpaid bills. Something sharp twisted behind his ribs. This wasn't just humiliation anymore. It was war, and Coyle had no idea what he started. Jalen stood over the table, staring at the suspension message, his voice barely a breath. I'm not letting him get away with this. The next morning felt heavier than the night before. Sherry sat at the table staring at her phone like it was a door that had slammed in her face. Jalen watched her from the hallway, his fists tight at his sides. Every time a new email popped up, she opened it, hoping for a mistake, a correction, anything that could fix the damage. But every message said the same cold thing. Account permanently closed. She tried calling customer support, her voice trembling as she pleaded for a real person. All she got was a recording telling her that the decision is final. Jalen stood behind her, hearing every word, feeling each one like a punch he couldn't block. Sherry whispered, I don't know how we're going to make rent. Her voice cracked halfway through, and she pressed her hand over her mouth to hide it, as if hiding pain could make it smaller. Jalen lowered himself into the chair across from her, the silence between them thick and aching. She kept talking even though her voice shook. Maybe I can pick up something else. Maybe a cleaning job. Maybe night shifts. It broke him. She was already doing 2 jobs. She was already running on fumes. None of this was her fault. He swallowed hard. This happened because of me. She shot up straight, shaking her head too fast, refusing that idea before he could even finish breathing. Don't you ever say that, she whispered, her voice fierce even through the tears she was fighting. You didn't do anything wrong, you just spoke the truth. Jalen stared down at the table, his voice barely a breath. People don't like when the truth comes from someone like us. Sherry reached out and gripped his arm, her touch warm and trembling. Baby, people don't get to decide your worth, but they did. Every time they locked her out of work, every time they laughed at him. Every time someone like Coyle used power to crush anyone who didn't fit his idea of important. Jalen felt something change inside him, something sharp and cold and steady. He stood up from the table, his chair scraping softly against the floor. He thinks he can do anything he wants. Sherry looked up at him, confused. Baby, what are you planning? Jalen didn't answer right away. He walked to the corner where his old second-hand laptop sat buried under wires and broken parts. I'm planning, he finally whispered, to stop acting like I'm powerless. He lifted the laptop onto the table, the cracked screen reflecting the determination building in his eyes. Sherry stared at him like she didn't recognize the fire suddenly burning inside her son. Jalen, don't do anything reckless. He met her eyes, steady and calm. I won't be reckless. His voice dropped lower. I'll be smart. Sherry watched him open the laptop, watched the glow of the screen fall across his face, watched the shift in his expression, from hurt to anger to something colder. She whispered his name once, like a warning, but he didn't look up. His fingers were already moving, fast, sure, guided by a mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos. Each line of code on the screen was a promise, not revenge, not yet, something deeper, something more dangerous to the man who hurt them. On the other side of town, Coyle had already bragged about getting the delivery woman banned. He laughed about it in front of his team. He joked about staying in your lane. He didn't know that his arrogance had created the exact thing he feared most. And in their small kitchen, in that quiet apartment, the glow from Jalen's screen brightened as the night deepened. His whisper slipped out, steady and focused. He wanted to crush us. Now he's going to see what I can really do. The keyboard clicked faster, sharper, until the room filled with the sound of a boy turning humiliation into a weapon. One line of code at a time. Days passed in a blur of clicking keys, glowing code, and the low hum of determination. Jalen barely slept, he barely ate. He moved like someone chasing something only he could see. Sherry watched him from the hallway each night, her heart torn between fear and pride. His focus was sharp, almost frightening. She whispered his name sometimes, hoping he would rest. He always answered the same way. I'm almost there. But she knew almost didn't mean soon. It meant he wasn't stopping until something broke, either him or the wall he was trying to climb. Jalen had always been good with patterns, but now his mind worked like a storm. He dug into public code repositories, old system manuals, patched white papers, anything he could find. He wasn't breaking rules. He wasn't hacking anything. He was doing something deeper, studying the cracks in Horizon's technology, the cracks Coyle ignored, the cracks Jalen saw instantly the day they walked into that building. And the more he studied, the more disgusted he felt. He knew this was broken, Jalen whispered to himself. He knew, and he blamed his own team. Sherry overheard once and stepped into the doorway. Baby, you don't have to carry this. Jalen didn't look up. Someone has to. He built something new, something no one told him to build, something no kid his age should have been able to design. A predictive security engine that scanned for vulnerabilities before they broke anything. It was smart, fast, quiet. It found dozens of system flaws in Horizon's software, flaws that could cost millions. He stared at the screen, his chest rising slowly as he whispered. He let all this sit here. He didn't care. The knowledge burned inside him until he felt sick. Coyle wasn't just cruel, he was dangerous, and people trusted him. It was late one night when a new message appeared on Sherry's phone. Not a threat, not another suspension, something unexpected. Hi, I need to talk to you and your son. The name made Sherry blink twice. Ava Martinez, senior engineer, the only one who hadn't laughed at Jalen. Sherry called her immediately, fear and hope twisting together as the phone rang. Ava answered on the first ring, her voice low and urgent. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what he did to you. Sherry's breath froze. You know about that? Ava exhaled sharply. Everyone knows. He bragged about it. He made jokes. He thought it was funny. Sherry sat down slowly, her hand gripping the arm of the chair. We didn't do anything wrong. Ava's voice cracked. I know, and he doesn't deserve the power he's been given. Ava arrived at their apartment the next afternoon, her face tight with stress. She stepped inside and looked at Jalen like she was seeing something rare, something important. She placed her bag on the table and pulled out a folder filled with printed documents. You need to see this. Jalen leaned forward, his eyes scanning each page. Internal reports, overlooked vulnerabilities, denied maintenance requests, emails where Coyle covered up problems to protect his reputation, another where he blamed a junior engineer for a mistake he made himself. Jalen's hands shook as he turned each page. He ignored all of this. Ava nodded. For months, maybe longer. Sherry stared at the folder, her voice trembling. Why are you showing us this? Ava hesitated before answering. Because he thinks he's untouchable. Because he hurts people and he gets away with it every time. Because I heard what he said after you left that day. Sherry closed her eyes slowly. What did he say? Ava swallowed. He said nobody would believe a delivery driver and her kid over him. He said ruining your accounts would teach you your place. Sherry covered her mouth with her hand. A small sound escaped her, half anger, half heartbreak. Jalen's jaw tightened. He did all that just because I said one thing. Ava leaned closer. He did it because your one thing was right. That scares him more than you know. Silence fell across the room for a long moment. Not a weak silence, not a scared one. A heavy silence, full of shifting power. Sherry looked from Ava to Jalen and whispered, Baby, you don't have to fight him. Jalen lifted his head slowly, his eyes clearer than they had been in days. I'm not fighting him. He closed the folder. I'm exposing him. Ava stared at him, surprised and impressed. You can do that? Jalen nodded toward his laptop. I already started. She opened the screen and her eyes widened as she saw his predictive security tool. You built this? Jalen shrugged softly, almost embarrassed. I just put the pieces together. Ava shook her head. This isn't putting pieces together. This is genius. Jalen looked down. He didn't think so. Ava placed a hand on the table. You want to hit him where it hurts. Don't go after the man. Go after the truth he's hiding. Jalen stared at the documents again. His clients, Ava nodded. They trust him, they pay him. If they knew the truth, he wouldn't survive a single week. Sherry's voice was barely a whisper. Is this safe? Jalen met her eyes. I'm not breaking in. I'm not touching their private systems. I'm showing them what's already wrong. Ava nodded. Everything he ignored is already public data. Anyone with the right mind could find it. Jalen gave a small, tired smile. Then I'm the right mind. Sherry looked at her son, really looked at him. The quiet boy who never bragged, never raised his voice, never believed people would listen. Now there was fire in him, purpose, strength, a different kind of genius. One born from hurt but sharpened by truth. Ava packed the folder away and whispered, Coyle's ego is going to get someone hurt. Help me expose him. Jalen nodded once. Slow, steady, sure and will. He turned back to his laptop. Sherry held her breath. Ava stepped aside. Everything in the room felt like it shifted by an inch, and Jalen's final whisper marked the beginning of the storm. He wanted to silence us. Now I'm giving everyone something they can't ignore. The screen lit his face as he began the first audit, and a faint, dangerous smile formed, quiet, confident, unshakable. The first audit took nearly an hour, but Jalen didn't look up once. His fingers moved fast, steady, sure. Every pattern he uncovered made his eyes narrow a little more. Every vulnerability he detected made the anger inside him sharpen. Sherry stood near the kitchen counter, arms crossed tight, afraid to interrupt. Ava watched from the side, stunned at how calmly his mind worked through problems that took full teams days to notice. When the report finally finished generating, the screen filled with a long list of warnings, red lines everywhere. Ava leaned over the table, reading each one. She shook her head slowly. These are critical. If any of these break, their whole system collapses. Jalen didn't blink. He ignored them. Ava nodded. He ignored everything. Jalen printed the report, stapled the pages, and placed the packet on the table. That's one. Ava stared at him. You're doing more. Jalen opened another file. He has more clients. Sherry whispered his name, half worried, half amazed. Baby, slow down. Jalen shook his head without looking up. He didn't slow down when he destroyed your account. I'm not slowing down either. The second report was worse than the first. Entire sections of Horizon's codebase held patches layered over old patches, held together by shortcuts and ignored warnings. Jalen whispered under his breath as he typed. He never fixed anything. He just hid the problems. Ava rubbed her forehead, her voice unsteady. If this gets out, every client they have will panic. By the time he reached the fourth report, something shifted. His voice grew calmer, his posture straighter. The fear he carried all his life began to melt into something new, confidence. Sherry noticed it first. The quiet boy who never spoke up was disappearing. In his place stood someone she'd never fully seen before. Someone who wasn't afraid of people like Coyle anymore. Ava paced the room, her steps quick and tense. Jalen, these companies depend on Horizon. They trusted Coyle. They trusted his team. Jalen paused only long enough to mutter, trusting the wrong person is dangerous. He hit enter. Another report generated. Another set of failures exposed. Another client who would soon realize they'd been lied to. Ava stopped pacing and leaned in. What are you planning to do with all of this? Jalen turned the pages to order. Send it, Sherry gasped. To who? Jalen looked up for the first time in hours. His eyes were steady, unshaken. To the people who deserve the truth. Ava covered her mouth. His clients, he nodded. Sherry stepped closer, fear rising in her chest. Baby, are you sure? Jalen sat back in his chair. They think he's keeping them safe. He's not. I'm not breaking anything. I'm showing them what's already broken. Ava whispered. You're going to flip the entire company upside down, Jalen whispered back. He started it. He gathered the reports into a neat stack, each page a quiet strike of truth. Every word exposed Coyle's neglect. Every chart revealed months of ignored warnings. Every summary pointed to the same problem. Coyle cared more about his image than the safety of his clients. Ava brought out her laptop. I can help you find the right contact people. CTO. Compliance officers. Directors. Jalen nodded. Send it to them all. Sherry looked between them, her voice trembling. This could ruin him. Jalen didn't hesitate. He ruined you first. The first email went out with a soft whoosh. A single sound, but it felt like a spark hitting dry grass. Eva exhaled. There goes the first one. Jalen opened another email window. Next, he attached the reports one by one. Every company, every leader, every decision-maker who needed to know the truth. Ava watched him work and whispered to Sherry, "He's going to be known after this," Sherry whispered back. "Not for revenge, for being right." Ava nodded slowly. "For being brilliant." 1 hour later, the first reply came in. A simple message with a huge impact. "We need to discuss this immediately." Jalen read it and whispered, "It's starting." Within minutes, more replies came. Then more. Some confused, some angry, some shocked, some terrified. Then one message hit the inbox like a strike of lightning. "Who are you?" Jalen's lips pressed into a thin line. He whispered, "Someone you should have listened to." Emails flooded in faster than Ava could read them. Clients were demanding explanations. Screenshots of Jalen's reports spread in private threads. Directors questioned Horizon's integrity. Coyle's reputation, once spotless, began cracking in places he couldn't see yet. Ava checked her phone and froze. Oh my God, someone already contacted Horizon's board. Sherry covered her mouth. Already? Ava nodded. They want a meeting about the security failures. Today. They want Coyle to explain everything, Jalen whispered. He can't explain what he never understood. The room fell into a tense silence. A powerful silence. A silence that signaled the shift in control. Jalen wasn't the scared kid anymore. He wasn't the quiet boy in the background. He wasn't the kid who should stay in his lane. He was the voice every executive suddenly needed to hear. Ava's phone buzzed again, louder this time. She read the message, her face turning pale, then looked at Jalen. "They want you there." The room went silent when Ava said those words. Sherry looked at her like she had spoken something impossible. "They want him where?" Ava swallowed. "At the meet with the board. They want to understand how a teenager found what their entire engineering division missed." Sherry shook her head, fear tightening her voice. "He's just a boy." Jalen didn't flinch. "I'm not going to hide." Ava stepped closer to him. "This is serious, Jalen. They're angry. They're scared. You're about to walk into a room full of people who have everything to lose." Jalen straightened. So did we. When they reached Horizon Dynamics, the atmosphere felt different. Last time Jalen entered as a delivery driver's son. This time the security guard scanned him twice, confused, before letting him through. People whispered as they walked past. Some stared at him like he was trouble. Some stared like he was. Sherry kept her hand near his arm, trying to stay strong, but her heart pounded so loudly it felt like it echoed down the hallway. Ava led them upstairs, her steps quick and nervous. "They've been calling Coyle for the last hour. He keeps blaming his team." "He hasn't figured out yet that the reports were sent by you," Jalen whispered. "He will." Ava gave a small, uneasy nod. "Yes, he will." The boardroom doors were heavy, tall, intimidating. Ava paused with her hand on the handle. "Jalen, once we walk in, there's no going back." Jalen took a slow breath. "Good," Sherry whispered his name softly, but he squeezed her hand to reassure her. Then Ava pushed the doors open. The room was full. Board members, senior engineers, legal officers, journalists who had been allowed in for transparency. Cameras pointed toward the head of the table, where Dr. Raymond Coyle stood pale and sweating. He looked nothing like the powerful man who had mocked Jalen days earlier. His tie was crooked, his hands shook, his eyes darted everywhere except the door. Then he saw Jalen. The blood drained from his face. A small murmur rippled through the room as people recognized him. "That's the kid, the one who sent the reports, the teenage analyst, the one Coyle pushed out of the building." Coyle tried to recover. He forced a stiff smile. "This is unnecessary. He's a child. He doesn't understand the systems. This entire thing is a misunderstanding." A board member cut him off. "Sit down." Coyle's jaw tightened, but he obeyed. A woman from the board turned to Jalen. "Young man, we reviewed the audit you sent. We confirmed every single issue. How did you find these vulnerabilities?" Jalen stepped forward, his voice calm but strong. "By looking." A ripple of surprise passed through the room. The woman frowned. "You're telling us 25 trained engineers didn't look?" Jalen glanced toward Coyle. "They were too busy listening to someone who told them what to see." Coyle slammed his hand on the table. Enough, he's lying. You're all letting a kid embarrass this company. He doesn't even have a high school diploma. Jalen didn't blink. I don't need one to see your mistakes. The room reacted at once. Quiet gasps, shifting chairs, murmured comments. Coyle stood red with anger. You think you're special? You think you're smarter than me? You're nothing but a... Ava stepped forward sharply. Finish that sentence. Coyle froze. Ava turned to the board. You should hear what he said the day Jalen fixed the system. Every insult, every threat, every joke he made about ruining their lives. She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. A recording played. Coyle's voice filled the room. Suspend her. That'll teach them to stay in their place. Nobody will believe a delivery driver or her kid. He embarrassed me. I don't care what it takes. Shut them out. Gasps echoed across the room. Jalen watched Coyle's face break. First anger, then panic, then something that looked like fear. The board turned to him. Is this true? Coyle stumbled back. I was frustrated. It was taken out of context. A board member slammed a folder onto the table. Explain the vulnerabilities your team missed, Coyle stammered. My engineers handled that. I was told it was under control. By who? The logs. He choked on his own excuses. Then the board turned to Jalen again. Show us. Jalen walked to the front table where a laptop waited. He plugged in his drive with steady hands. I'll walk you through it. Coyle lunged forward. Don't let him touch the system. He'll break it. He'll make it worse. The board cut him off. Sit down or you'll be escorted out. Coyle sank into his chair, shaking. Jalen began. He opened the predictive security engine. He showed how the routing loop formed. He traced ignored warnings. He revealed bypass security flags. He displayed timestamps proving these issues existed for months. Engineers leaned forward, stunned. Journalists scribbled notes. Board members exchanged troubled looks. A senior officer whispered, How did we miss all of this? Another engineer whispered back, We didn't look, he did. Coyle tried to speak again, but his voice cracked. This is impossible. He's manipulating the data. He's not capable of. Jalen turned toward him slowly. I saw what you ignored. I fixed what you couldn't. A hush fell across the room. Cameras zoomed in. Witnesses stared. Jalen added one more line that dropped like thunder. You didn't fail because you were busy. You failed because you were proud. Coyle opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The board leaned back in their chairs, their decision already forming as the room absorbed the shift in power. Everything felt different now. For the first time, Jalen wasn't the one being dismissed or doubted. Everyone was listening to him, quiet, focused, almost breathless, and Coyle felt it happening. His control slipping, his authority collapsing, his lies unraveling. The fear in his eyes said everything. A board member looked directly at Coyle and whispered a cold sentence that froze the entire table. We know who failed here. Now we need to decide what to do with you. Every eye in the room locked onto Coyle as the board member's words echoed like a slow-moving storm. The air felt thick, tight, electric. Coyle's lips trembled as he tried to defend himself, but nothing came out except a shaky breath. He looked around the table for support, but every engineer stared at him with disappointment or disgust. The same people he once barked orders had now watched him crumble without lifting a finger to help him. It was the first time Jalen had ever seen someone who lived on pride stand with nothing holding them up. One board member folded her hands and spoke calmly. Dr. Coyle, these failures were preventable. You misled us. Another leaned forward. You hid information that put millions of dollars at risk. A third added, and you retaliated against innocent people. We have evidence. The more they spoke, the smaller Coyle looked. He tried to fix his tie, tried to sit taller, tried to look powerful. But his hands shook too hard to keep up the act. He pointed toward Jalen in desperation. You're taking the word of a child over a professional? He doesn't know what he's doing. The board member nearest him replied sharply, He knows more than you did. The room erupted in whispers. Jalen stood silently in front of the screen, his face calm, his posture steady. He wasn't gloating, he wasn't smiling, he wasn't even angry. He simply looked like someone who had finally been heard after a lifetime of being ignored. One of the engineers stood from his chair, clearing his throat before speaking. He's right. The kid saw something we missed, all of us missed. That takes talent. Another engineer added, I reviewed his reports myself. They're accurate. A third whispered, almost ashamed he fixed the system, we didn't. A board member tapped a folder on the table. Dr. Coyle, we have all the evidence we need, the failures, the ignored warnings, the retaliation. He paused. This company cannot survive with you as director. Coyle stumbled back into his chair. You can't fire me. I've worked here 15 years. I built this department. Another board member spoke coldly, and you destroyed it with your ego. A wave of murmured agreement moved across the table. A journalist scribbled notes as cameras zoomed in closer, capturing every crack in Coyle's composure. Then the board turned toward Jalen again. Young man, thank you for your courage. Jalen lowered his eyes slightly. I just told the truth. The woman nodded. Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do. Sherry watched her son, tears filling her eyes but refusing to fall. Ava stood beside him with a proud, steady expression that said without words, "This is your moment." Jalen didn't step back. He didn't shrink. He stayed exactly where he needed to be. Coyle suddenly stood, his chair screeching loudly across the floor. "This isn't over," he shouted. "You're all going to regret this. You're throwing away a whole career over a report written by a kid." The board remained still. One of them lifted a hand. "Security will escort you out." Coyle froze. His anger turned to horror. "Escort? You can't. This is my company." "It was," the board member replied. "Not anymore." Two security officers entered the room. The whole boardroom watched as Coyle stepped back in disbelief. No, wait, listen, I'm the victim here. This is a mistake." But no one believed him. No one even moved toward him. The officers took him gently by the arms and guided him toward the door. As he passed Jalen, he glared at him with a mix of fear and hate. But Jalen didn't flinch. Their eyes met for just a second. Long enough for Coyle to realize the truth. He hadn't been beaten by a kid. He had been beaten by the consequences of his own choices. The door closed behind him. Silence filled the room, heavy but clean. A new kind of silence. A silence of justice settling into place. One board member finally spoke. "Jalen, we would like to work with you if you're willing." Another added, "Your talent is beyond rare." A journalist asked softly, "How did you learn all this?" Jalen hesitated. Then he glanced at his mother. "I watched, I practiced. I never stopped trying." Sherry covered her mouth again, tears finally breaking free. Ava stepped closer and whispered, "You changed everything today." Jalen whispered back, "He thought I was invisible." Ava nodded. "Not anymore." The board dismissed the meeting with a final statement. "We will be issuing a public announcement. Dr. Coyle is removed from his position effective immediately. We will credit the discovery of these vulnerabilities to..." The woman paused, then smiled. "To Jalen Brooks." The words hit the room like a warm wave. Journalists began typing. Engineers nodded. Sherry broke into quiet sobs, covering her face. Jalen just stood there, unable to speak for a moment as the weight of the moment settled on him. For the first time in his life, he felt seen, not as a delivery driver's son, not as a quiet kid in the background, but as someone who mattered. A notification buzzed on Ava's phone. She glanced at it, then turned her screen toward Jalen. His name was already trending. The world had just begun to notice him. The news spread faster than anyone expected. Within an hour of the board's announcement, every major tech outlet had posted headlines about the 16-year-old who exposed one of the city's biggest companies. Some called him a prodigy. Others called him a whistleblower. Some simply wrote, "The teen who saw what 25 engineers missed." Jalen read the words in silence, almost not believing they were about him. Sherry hovered behind him, tears drying on her cheeks as she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Baby, they're talking about you." Jalen whispered, "They're finally listening." Ava returned to their apartment later that evening, still wearing her ID badge and carrying folders from the board. She looked exhausted but hopeful. "They're rebuilding everything," she said, setting the folders on the table. "New security protocols, new leadership, new audits." She paused. "They want your help," Sherry gasped. "But he's just a kid," Ava smiled. "A kid who saved their company." Jalen stared at the folders with a mix of fear and excitement. "What exactly do they want?" Ava opened the top folder and slid a document toward him. "A consulting contract." Jalen blinked. "Consulting?" Ava nodded. "Paid, official, legal, respectful." Sherry covered her mouth. "Paid," her voice trembled on the word. Jalen skimmed the document. They were offering him more money than he had ever seen in one place. Enough to pay the rent for months. Enough to fix their car. Enough to breathe. But that wasn't the part that hit him hardest. The title under his name said Independent Security Analyst, not kid, not helper, Not delivery driver's son, analyst. He whispered the word to himself. It felt unreal. Sherry's voice broke the silence. Baby, you did this. Jalen looked up. We did this. She hugged him tightly. The kind of hug that lasted longer than usual, full of relief and pride and disbelief all at once. Ava watched with a soft smile on her face, her eyes shining slightly. When Sherry finally let go, Ava stepped toward Jalen. I want to work with you too, she said quietly. If you'll have me. Jalen blinked in surprise. Me? Ava nodded. You're the smartest person I've ever watched work. I want to build something with you, something real. Jalen sat down slowly. What would we... Ava pulled another paper from her bag. A program that teaches cybersecurity to kids who don't get opportunities. A program that gives people like you a chance to be heard. Sherry's eyes widened. You mean, like a company? Ava nodded. A small one, at first. Jalen stared at the idea, the words echoing in his mind like a new dream being born. A company. Something built from truth, not power. Something built from opportunity instead of ego. He whispered Brooks' logic. Sherry frowned. What's that? Jalen hesitated. A name I used once. For a school project. For algorithms I made. Ava smiled. Then it's perfect. Before they could talk more, the doorbell rang. Sherry tensed, wiping her eyes quickly. Ava moved aside as Jalen opened the door. Two reporters stood there holding microphones but looking surprisingly gentle. One of them said, We're sorry to come unannounced. We just wanted to ask if you'd be willing to speak about what happened. Sherry stepped forward protectively. He's tired. Maybe another time. The reporter nodded respectfully, of course. But before we go, your son has inspired a lot of people today. Jalen's eyes widened. Inspired? The reporter smiled warmly. Kids who never saw someone like them in this world. Parents who juggled two jobs. Students who were scared to speak up. People who felt invisible. She stepped back. The world needs stories like his. They left without pushing further, and Jalen closed the door slowly, shaken in a good way. Inspired, that word echoed inside him even louder than analyst. Later that night, as Sherry prepared a simple dinner and Ava sorted through paperwork, Jalen stepped outside onto the small balcony. The city lights glowed in the distance. Cars passed below. For once he didn't feel small in this big world. He felt seen. He felt capable. He felt like he had stepped into something larger than the moment. Something new. Something he could grow into. His phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number. He opened it. You are the youngest cybersecurity genius in the country. We'd like to talk about scholarship opportunities. Jalen stared at the screen, stunned. Scholarship opportunities. College future. He walked back inside slowly, holding the phone out so Sherry could see. She covered her mouth again, tears returning instantly. Oh my God, baby, Jalen whispered. Mom, you don't have to work 3 jobs anymore. Her tears fell before she could hold them back. The house felt brighter, softer, lighter. Ava looked up from the table, holding one last document, her voice steady and hopeful. Jalen, you need to see this. It's an invitation to speak at a national conference. When the noise faded and the excitement settled, Jalen found himself alone in his room, staring at the ceiling. Everything felt different now. Not because the world suddenly became kinder, but because he finally understood something he had never said out loud. People had tried to measure his worth by what he looked like, where he came from, and what job his mother worked. They tried to shrink him into a box that fit their idea of ordinary. But no one, not even someone as powerful as Dr. Coyle, had the right to decide how far he could go. His mind, his courage, his quiet strength, those things did not belong to anyone but him. He thought about the day Coyle laughed at him, the way the room stared, the way Sherry tried to protect him even when she was hurting too. That moment could have broken him. It should have. But instead, it became the spark that pushed him forward. It taught him that humiliation doesn't have to end a story. Sometimes it begins one. As he lay there, he realized something else. Coyle didn't fall because Jalen wanted revenge. He fell because he built his life on pride instead of truth. He fell because he ignored others, hid mistakes, and used power to push people down. In the end, he wasn't defeated by a teenager. He was defeated by the truth he refused to face. And Jalen wasn't lifted up by luck. He was lifted by the courage to stand in that truth, even when it hurt. He closed his eyes and whispered into the darkness. When the world tries to silence you, let your talent speak louder. The words felt strong, steady, like a promise to himself and anyone who had ever been underestimated. People would learn his name, but that wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was the message behind it. Never judge someone by their job, by their clothes, or by the door they walk through. Genius has no label, integrity has no rank, and courage has no age. They laughed at the delivery driver's son. Now they study his work.